89 seconds.
Yes.
That's all that separates us from midnight on the doomsday clock.
It's incredibly close.
And hanging over us, what is it? Roughly 12,121 nuclear warheads spread across the globe.
Yeah, the numbers are just staggering when you look at them.
Let's just cut to the chase here, because this deep dive, we're locking on to the intensely complex reality of nuclear weapons.
Exactly. We're not going to just, rehash the basics. We're aiming deeper.
Right.
We're dissecting the history, looking for those really pivotal moments, those shifts.
Okay.
We'll scrutinize the logic, that sort of paradoxical logic of nuclear deterrence, especially now in today's fractured world. Then assessing the real implications of the arsenals we have now and the modernization that's happening.
Which is happening everywhere, right?
Pretty much, yeah. And we'll examine the regulations, those kind of barely there guardrails, and confront the almost unthinkable consequences if these weapons were ever used.
The sources we've got really lay out a detailed landscape of this whole critical issue.
They do. It's comprehensive stuff.
And this isn't just some, theoretical exercise for policy wonks, is it?
Not at all. It affects everyone.
Whether you're trying to navigate geopolitical complexities in your job or just trying to make sense of the global instability we see.
Or even if you're just driven by like a deep need to understand these forces that could literally reshape our future.
It's directly relevant to you, the listener. We're going to try and bypass the dense jargon.
Yeah, get to the core insights.
Deliver the actionable stuff. Our mission, it's pretty straightforward. Extract the most critical knowledge from these analyses.
Give you a shortcut, basically.
A shortcut to a more nuanced understanding of nuclear weapons right now in the 21st century. So, where did this all kick off beyond the standard textbook history, I mean?
Well, the groundwork was laid earlier in the 20th century, obviously. But the late 1930s, that was the real turning point.
With fission.
Exactly. The discovery of nuclear fission, this idea that the atom could release immense energy when split. And a key insight here, I think, is that many of the European scientists involved, they were acutely aware of the military potential.
Especially with Nazi Germany on the rise.
Precisely. This wasn't just abstract science in a lab. It was knowledge with, an immediate and potentially devastating application.
It's pretty sobering to think that the act of discovery itself had this inherent duality. Immense progress tied up with unparalleled destruction.
Absolutely. And that initial fear, that fear of a German bomb, it really put the foot on the accelerator for everything else.
Because they realized a chain reaction was possible.
Right. The understanding that a self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction could happen immediately flagged the military implications. And this created a profound dilemma for the scientists.
Yeah, you read about them grappling with the morality of it all.
Many were. And the fear that Germany might actually be ahead in this race. It spurred a lot of émigré scientists, those who'd fled Europe, to pour their knowledge into the Allied efforts. There was this real fierce urgency.
Which brings us straight to the Manhattan Project. And it wasn't just like a big lab experiment, was it? It fundamentally changed the whole relationship between science and state power.
Oh, absolutely. The driving force, as we said, was that very real fear of a German atomic weapon.
Einstein's letter was key there.
A pivotal moment, yes. The Einstein-Roosevelt letter in '39, prompted by Szilard and Wigner, urging the U.S. to get its own research going. The project then officially kicked off around December 6, 1941.
Wow. Right around Pearl Harbor.
The timing is significant. And the insight here is this wasn't just science. It was a massive mobilization of national resources, scientific, industrial, financial, all focused on this single terrifying goal.
December 6th. That date carries some weight. Who were the key players steering this unprecedented thing?
Well, you had J. Robert Oppenheimer, of course. Brilliant, but ultimately, conflicted scientific director at Los Alamos guiding the actual bomb design.
Right.
Then Brigadier General Leslie Groves provided the essential military oversight, the logistics, the muscle.
Kept things moving.
Exactly. People like Enrico Fermi and Leo Szilard achieved the first controlled chain reaction. That was the moment that proved it was really possible.
The proof of concept.
And Ernest Orlando Lawrence was crucial for the technology to enrich uranium, which was incredibly complex. The insight is that you had this diverse group, often with, let's say, clashing personalities and definitely differing ethical views.
But united by the threat.
United by the perceived urgency of the German threat, yeah.
Sounds like just an unimaginable concentration of brain power, all working under intense secrecy and pressure.
It was staggering.
Right.
The complexity spanning multiple secret sites, Oak Ridge for uranium, Hanford for plutonium, Los Alamos for the design and assembly,
And they were chasing both uranium and plutonium.
simultaneously pursuing both paths, yeah. The financial investment was just astronomical, around $2 billion back then.
Which is huge money for the time.
Huge. And the culmination was the Trinity test, July 16, 1945. Seeing that test tower just vaporize the mushroom cloud, it was this visceral demonstration of the power they'd unleashed.
The point of no return, really.
And the key insight from that is that this single event irrevocably changed warfare, international relations, everything.
A moment of awe, but also absolute terror. And that test led directly to President Truman's decision to actually use these weapons against Japan.
Yes. The stated rationale was to force a swift end to the war, avoid the horrific casualties expected from a land invasion of Japan.
The calculation was brutal.
It was. August 6, 1945, little boy, the uranium bomb, hit Hiroshima. At least 70,000 immediate deaths, devastating long-term effects from radiation.
Unimaginable.
And then just 3 days later, August 9th, Fat Man, the plutonium bomb on Nagasaki. Estimated 40,000 immediate deaths, similar long-term suffering. Japan surrendered on September 2nd.
And the really profound, disturbing insight here is that this was the first, and so far the only time nuclear weapons have been used in warfare. It set this incredibly controversial precedent.
A precedent that still shapes everything today.
The first and only time. It's a chilling thought. It instantly pushed us into a completely new era, didn't it?
Absolutely. And here's a crucial takeaway. While it was intended to end that war, this display of unimaginable destructive power, it also acted as a powerful catalyst for nuclear proliferation.
Other nations saw the power.
They saw the power and quickly understood these weapons represented the ultimate form of security, the ultimate guarantee. And that realization really ignited the Cold War arms race. The dawn of the nuclear age was, well, this moment of incredible scientific achievement, but also profound, enduring global anxiety.
Which leads us right into the next phase. These weapons becoming seen as, quote-unquote, guarantors of national security, and how deterrence evolved. The Cold War rivalry was really the furnace where this thinking was forged.
It absolutely was.
Yeah.
The post-World War II landscape was just dominated by the U.S.-Soviet rivalry. The U.S. had a nuclear monopoly, but it was very brief.
Until 49.
Ended abruptly in 1949 with the Soviet Union's first test. And that just dramatically escalated the arms race. Then came the H-bomb.
Thermonuclear weapons. Much bigger.
Far, far more powerful. Developed by both sides in the early 50s, it just amplified the potential devastation exponentially. The key insight here, I think, is that all this technological advancement, it didn't bring more security.
It did the opposite.
It led to a dramatically heightened sense of mutual vulnerability.
Yeah.
Everyone felt less secure.
So each side building bigger, better bombs just intensified the other's fear, creating this incredibly dangerous feedback loop, like a spiral.
Precisely. The classic security dilemma, but amplified to an existential level. Every perceived advance by one side was seen as a direct threat by the other. It fueled this reciprocal, relentless buildup. The initial U.S. strategy was massive retaliation.
Basically, nuke them back if they do anything.
Pretty much. Threaten a full-scale nuclear response to any major Soviet aggression, conventional or otherwise. But that evolved under the pressure of mutual capability.
And this eventually led to the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, MAD. The name itself tells you a lot about the terrifying logic.
It does. And here's where the really unsettling insight lies, I think. As both the U.S. and the Soviets developed these large and critically survivable nuclear arsenals.
Survivable meaning they could take a hit and still hit back.
Exactly. That's when MAD emerged. The fundamental idea was simple, in a terrifying way. Any nuclear attack by one superpower would inevitably trigger a retaliatory strike so massive it would guarantee the destruction of both sides.
Mutual annihilation.
Right. And the certainty of that mutual annihilation was supposed to deter either side from ever launching a first strike.
So the logic, however horrifying, was that the only way to prevent nuclear war was to make absolutely sure everyone would be wiped out if it started.
That's the core of it. And MAD rested on two absolute fundamentals. One, a credible second strike capability.
The ability to absorb that first hit and still inflict unacceptable damage back.
Precisely. And two, the perceived unwavering will to actually do it, to retaliate no matter what.
Which led to the nuclear triad.
Crucial for ensuring that second strike capability. Land-based ICBMs, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, SLBMs, and strategic bombers.
3 different ways to deliver the bombs.
The redundancy was key. It made a disarming first strike virtually impossible. You couldn't take out all three legs simultaneously.
Robert McNamara had that concept of assured destruction, right? Like a specific number of warheads needed.
Yeah, he talked about the ability to destroy, say, a significant chunk, maybe 20–25% of the population, 50% of industry, with around 400 high-yield weapons. That, he argued, would be enough to deter anyone. It solidified this grim calculus.
And the name MAD itself wasn't even coined by its proponents.
No, interestingly, it was coined by a critic, Donald Brennan. He used it to highlight the inherent, well, madness, the instability of relying on mutual terror for peace.
And we came terrifyingly close sometimes, Cuba.
The Cuban Missile Crisis in '62, absolutely. And the Stanislav-Petrov incident in '83, the false alarm. Those were stark reminders of just how fragile that balance of terror really was.
So when the Cold War ended, you'd think MAD's relevance would have just cratered.
Well, in its classic bipolar U.S.-Soviet form, yes, its dominance definitely receded. But the underlying logic of deterrence, that didn't just vanish.
It adapted.
It adapted to a much more complex multipolar world. You had new nuclear states emerging, persistent regional tensions.
India, Pakistan, North Korea.
Exactly. Existing nuclear powers, they continue to rely on nuclear weapons as that ultimate security backstop. But their doctrines evolved.
To deal with new threats.
Yeah, things like proliferation, the worry about WMDs in the hands of non-state actors or so-called rogue states, even deterring large-scale conventional attacks.
And SICRI, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, they've noted a worrying trend recently.
They have. They observe that as global geopolitical relations deteriorate, which they clearly are, the perceived importance and potential role of nuclear weapons in security strategies is actually increasing again.
So we're not moving away from them.
In some ways, it seems we're moving back towards relying on them more, or at least thinking about them more. So while the landscape is more fragmented, that fundamental principle deterring attack through the threat of unacceptable retaliation, it persists, just in a more dynamic and arguably more dangerous environment.
It's a really sobering thought that even decades after the Cold War, these things remain so central. And now we have more countries in the club. Who exactly are the members of this nuclear club today?
Okay, as of early 2024, we have 9 confirmed nuclear-armed states. There's the United States, Russia, the UK, France, China. Those are the original 5 recognized by the NPT.
Right, the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, makes that specific distinction.
It does. It recognizes those 5 as nuclear weapon states because they developed and tested weapons before January 1st, 1967.
And the other 4?
India, Pakistan, North Korea, and Israel. They developed their arsenals outside that treaty framework. India and Pakistan tested openly. North Korea tested. Israel maintains its policy of ambiguity, never confirming nor denying.
It's actually remarkable in a way that the number hasn't grown much larger over the decades.
It is noteworthy. Despite decades of proliferation concerns, the club has stayed relatively small. It suggests the barriers to entry are high, and maybe non-proliferation efforts have had some effect, however imperfect.
So let's talk numbers. What do the global inventories actually look like right now?
Okay, CP's estimate for January 2024 puts the total number of nuclear warheads across all 9 states at around 12,121.
12,000.
Now, not all of those are ready to go. Approximately 9,585 are in military stockpiles available for use. And of those, around 3,904 were actually deployed with operational forces.
Deployed meaning on missiles, subs, or at bomber bases.
Exactly. Ready or nearly ready for use. And what's particularly concerning is the estimated increase in warheads kept on high operational alert, basically, ready for immediate launch. That number is thought to be around 2,100.
2,000 weapons on hair trigger alert.
Mostly belonging to Russia and the U.S., but China is now also believed to have some warheads at a high state of readiness.
And the U.S. and Russia still dominate the total numbers.
Overwhelmingly. They possess nearly 90% of all nuclear warheads combined.
Wow.
And while the total global number has slowly decreased since the Cold War peak because the U.S. and Russia have been dismantling retired, older warheads,
The operational numbers are different.
the reduction in operationally deployed warheads has pretty much stalled. And in fact, those numbers are showing signs of creeping up again.
That's not good news.
No, it creates this stark 2-tiered structure with the U.S. and Russia way out ahead. And this increasing number of operationally deployed and high-alert warheads, it signals a heightened state of readiness globally, and that inherently elevates the risk of miscalculation or accident.
We have a detailed table here showing the estimates for each country deployed, stockpiled, total. The sheer scale is, well, it's sobering to see laid out. Now, a warhead on its own isn't enough. You need a delivery system. We hear about the nuclear triad a lot. What exactly is that?
The nuclear triad is generally considered the gold standard, the most robust setup for a credible nuclear deterrent. It means having three distinct types of delivery platforms.
Land, sea, and air.
Exactly. Land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, SLBMs, and strategic bombers carrying bombs or cruise missiles.
And the strength is the redundancy.
That's the core idea. An adversary would face the almost impossible task of trying to simultaneously find and destroy all three legs of your deterrent. It guarantees you can hit back, ensuring that second strike capability we talked about. Each leg also has its own distinct advantages and disadvantages.
Okay, let's break those down. ICBMs first, the land-based ones.
Okay, ICBMs. Their advantage is speed, very rapid launch, and accuracy. They can hit hardened targets precisely. The downside: fixed silos can be vulnerable to a preemptive strike, although some countries use mobile ICBMs to counter that.
So speed and precision are key for ICBMs. What about SLBMs, launched from submarines?
SLBMs offer exceptional survivability. Nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, SSBNs, can hide in the ocean for months, virtually undetectable.
Making them the ultimate second strike weapon.
Pretty much guarantees retaliation, yeah. The trade-offs might be slightly longer communication time to give launch orders and potentially lower accuracy compared to the latest ICBMs, though that gap is closing. Their main strength is stealth.
And finally, strategic bombers.
Bombers offer flexibility. They can be launched, but then recalled if the situation changes, a crucial de-escalation option that missiles don't have.
A human element.
Right. They can also carry large payloads, diverse types of weapons. But they're slower than missiles, much more vulnerable to air defenses, though aerial refueling gives them huge range. Their strength is that flexibility and the visible signal they send when deployed during a crisis.
And which countries actually have this full triad capability?
The U.S., Russia, China, and India are generally recognized as having a full triad. Israel is often suspected of having a triad-like capability as well, though their posture is ambiguous. The fact that these major powers pursue and maintain a triad really underscores its perceived strategic value for ensuring a credible, survivable deterrent.
Are there other significant delivery systems beyond the triad?
Oh, definitely. Cruise missiles are a big one. They can be launched from aircraft, ships, submarines, even ground launchers.
More versatile, maybe?
Often, yeah. And then you have the whole category of tactical or non-strategic nuclear weapons. These are generally shorter range, lower yield weapons intended for battlefield use.
And that's a concerning area right now.
It's a very concerning trend. The increasing focus by some countries on developing and potentially deploying these non-strategic weapons could, theoretically, lower the threshold for actually using a nuclear weapon in a conflict. It really complicates escalation control.
How so?
Well, if you start using small nukes on the battlefield, where does it stop? Does it inevitably lead to larger strategic exchanges? It's a huge risk. Plus, you have the proliferation of dual-capable missile systems that can carry either a conventional or a nuclear warhead.
Which creates ambiguity.
Massive ambiguity. If you detect a launch, how do you know what kind of warhead is on it? You might have to assume the worst, which, again, increases the risk of miscalculation and rapid escalation in a crisis.
It seems like every single one of the 9 nuclear-armed states is actively modernizing its arsenal right now. It's not just sitting back.
That's precisely right. All 9 are involved in modernization programs. And some, most notably China, are undertaking really significant expansions of their forces as well.
What does modernization actually involve? Just building new versions of old stuff?
Yeah, it's more than that. It involves replacing aging systems, yes, but also enhancing the capabilities of the warheads themselves, making them more accurate, maybe offering variable yields, and crucially, improving the survivability and reliability of the delivery platforms, making missiles harder to intercept, submarines quieter, bombers stealthier.
Can you give some examples?
Sure. The U.S. is developing its new Sentinel ICBM, the Columbia-class submarines, the B-21 Raider stealth bomber, new warheads like the W-93. Russia's deep into its own modernization, the Sarmat heavy ICBM, the Boreai submarines, hypersonic systems like Avangard, the Poseidon nuclear torpedo.
And China's buildup is particularly rapid.
Extremely rapid. We're seeing massive construction of new ICBM silos, development of new SLBMs like the JL-3 for their upcoming Type 096 submarines, work on a new stealth bomber, the H-20. Projections suggest China could have over 1,000 warheads by 2030.
That's a huge increase.
It's a dramatic shift. And it's not just the big three. The UK is building new Dreadnought-class subs. France is upgrading its subs and missiles. India and Pakistan are developing more advanced missiles, including MIRVs.
MIRVs, multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles. Explain those again.
Right. A single missile carries multiple warheads, each capable of hitting a separate target. So one missile launch can threaten many different locations.
And that's destabilizing because...
Several reasons. It allows a very rapid increase in the number of deployed warheads without needing lots more missiles. It massively complicates arms control verification. How do you know how many warheads are on each missile? And critically, it can create a use-it-or-lose-it incentive in a crisis.
Meaning?
If you think an attack is coming, you might feel pressured to launch your MIRV missiles first because they represent such a tempting high-value target for the enemy. Hitting one missile silo could take out multiple warheads.
So India and Pakistan are both developing MIRVs.
Yes, which is particularly concerning given their history and proximity. North Korea is also aggressively diversifying solid-fuel ICBMs, like the Hwasong-18, are easier to launch quickly, new SLBMs. And even Israel is believed to be modernizing its Jericho missiles.
So MIRVs are a key destabilizing technology here.
They really are. The pursuit and enhancement of MIRV capabilities by multiple states is a significant, worrying development. What we're seeing fundamentally is a new, multipolar nuclear arms race.
Not just US-Russia anymore.
No. It's characterized by both quantitative increases like China's expansion and a qualitative competition for technological superiority across the board, hypersonics, AI, cyber integration.
And this is happening while arms control is weakening.
Exactly. It's happening against a backdrop of declining transparency, the erosion of established treaties, like the uncertainty around New START expiring in 2026, Russia pulling out of the CTBT ratification. It diminishes predictability, erodes trust, and makes the whole situation much riskier.
Without those traditional arms control guardrails.
The potential for miscalculation, for misunderstanding, for accidental conflict is significantly amplified. It's the dangerous mix.
Given this constant development cycle and the inherent dangers, what mechanisms are actually in place to try and control these weapons? What are the main treaties and regulatory frameworks?
Well, trying to regulate nuclear weapons is obviously an immense challenge. But over the decades, a complex framework of treaties, international agreements, and verification systems has been built up. The absolute cornerstone of this global non-proliferation regime is the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Right. The NPT, often described as having this central bargain at its heart.
That's a good way to put it. It opened for signature back in 1968, came into force in 1970. It had three core objectives. One, prevent the spread of nukes to states that don't have them.
Non-proliferation.
Two, promote cooperation in the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. And three, pursue negotiations in good faith towards nuclear disarmament.
That's the bargain part.
That's the grand bargain. The non-nuclear states agree not to acquire nuclear weapons. In return, the 5 recognized nuclear weapon states, the P5, commit under Article 6 to pursue disarmament. And they also agree to facilitate access to peaceful nuclear technology under international safeguards.
Safeguards monitored by the IAEA.
Correct. The International Atomic Energy Agency handles the verification for non-nuclear states, and the NPT has near-universal membership, 191 parties. That alone shows its importance in limiting the number of nuclear states, but it faces significant strains.
Particularly around that disarmament part, Article 6, the nuclear powers haven't really delivered.
That's the major point of contention. Many non-nuclear states argue, quite forcefully, that the nuclear weapon states haven't fulfilled their end of the bargain, especially when you see them all undertaking these massive modernization programs we just discussed.
It undermines the treaty's legitimacy.
It definitely erodes it and creates huge tensions. The last few NPT review conferences have failed to reach consensus on substantive outcomes, which really highlights these deep divisions. But despite all these challenges and imperfections, the NPT is still considered indispensable. Without it, proliferation might be much wider.
Okay, then there's the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the CTBT. What's its goal and where does it stand now?
The CTBT opened for signature in 1996. Its aim is simple: a global, legally binding ban on all nuclear weapon test explosions anywhere. The goal is to hinder the development of new weapon designs and significant upgrades to existing ones.
Has it been successful?
It's had widespread support, 187 signatories, 178 ratifications. But, and this is a big, but it hasn't formally entered into force yet.
Why not?
Because it requires ratification by 44 specific Annex II states, basically, those countries that had nuclear power or research reactors when the treaty was negotiated. 8 of those still haven't ratified, including key players like the U.S. and China, who've signed but not ratified, and India, Pakistan, and North Korea haven't even signed.
And Russia recently withdrew its ratification.
Yes, that was a significant and concerning step backwards in late 2023.
But even without being legally enforced, it seems to have had a major impact on testing.
It absolutely has. The CTBT has been remarkably effective in establishing a de facto global moratorium on nuclear testing. Since the year 2000, the only country to conduct nuclear tests has been North Korea.
So it complements the NPT by making it harder to develop new bombs.
Precisely. It constrains that qualitative arms race aspect. And it also established a very sophisticated verification system, the International Monitoring System, or IMS.
What's that involve?
It's a global network of over 300 monitoring facilities, seismic sensors, hydroacoustic for underwater, infrasound for atmospheric, and radionuclide detectors to sniff out radioactive particles. It's designed to detect any nuclear explosion anywhere on Earth.
And that system is actually running now.
Oh yes, it's fully operational, constantly sending data back to Vienna for analysis. And interestingly, the data is also useful for civilian things, like tsunami warnings or tracking volcanic ash clouds.
Verification seems absolutely critical for any arms control treaty to work. How do we actually ensure countries are complying?
Verification is indeed the linchpin. Without confidence and compliance, treaties fall apart. It aims to do three things: detect non-compliance if it happens, deter violations in the first place because countries know they might get caught, and build confidence among states that everyone else is playing by the rules.
And how is it done? What are the tools?
Effective verification relies on a mix of technical capabilities and, crucially, political will. Technically, you have things like national technical means, or NTMs, that's basically each country's own spy satellites, intelligence gathering, etc. Then you have cooperative measures like on-site inspections, OSIs, data exchanges between countries, and international monitoring systems like the CTBT's IMS or the IAEA safeguards we mentioned.
But there must be limitations, challenges.
Oh, absolutely. Huge ones. Just defining what constitutes adequate verification can be subjective and highly political. Technical means might struggle to detect very small-scale violations or cleverly concealed activities.
And getting intrusive access is hard.
Very hard. There's always a tension between wanting thorough verification and a state's desire to protect its national security secrets. Challenge inspections, for example, are often politically difficult to invoke and carry out. Plus, a fundamental lack of trust between nations can undermine the whole process. Even if you have robust mechanisms, if the political climate is bad, countries might view perfectly normal activities with suspicion or politicize minor deviations.
And verifying complete dismantlement seems especially tough.
That's the ultimate challenge, often called the last 10% problem. Verifying that every single warhead has been dismantled and the fissile material disposed of irreversibly is technically and politically formidable. And now, emerging technologies like cyber capabilities are adding whole new layers of complexity to verification. How do you verify compliance with potential future agreements limiting cyber attacks on nuclear systems, for instance?
It sounds like verification isn't just a technical problem.
Not at all. It's deeply intertwined with political relationships, transparency, trust, and the fundamental commitment of states to actually uphold their obligations.
We have a table here outlining some of the key nuclear arms control treaties, the ones still functioning, the ones that have collapsed. It really paints a picture of the efforts made, but also the current fragility of that whole architecture.
It does. It underscores the long, difficult history of trying to control these weapons and the precarious state we find ourselves in now, with arms control weakening just as geopolitical tensions are rising.
The actual decision to use these weapons, it's almost impossible to comprehend. Who holds that ultimate authority, and under what conditions might they even contemplate such an action?
Right. In all 9 of the nuclear-armed states, the ultimate authority to order the use of nuclear weapons rests firmly with the highest civilian leadership, usually a president or a prime minister. But the specific command and control structures, the processes, and importantly, the declared conditions under which they might consider use, they vary quite considerably from country to country.
Could you maybe outline some of the key differences in how these national command authorities are set up?
Sure. Let's take a few examples. In the United States, the president has the sole, undisputed authority to order a nuclear launch. The orders are then transmitted down a very well-defined military chain of command. There's a strong emphasis on the principle of human in the loop.
No automated systems making the decision?
No. In Russia, the president also holds the ultimate authority. Their declared doctrine allows for nuclear use in response to a WMD attack on Russia or its allies, but also, significantly, in response to conventional aggression that threatens the very existence of the Russian state.
That seems like a lower threshold than just responding to a nuclear attack.
Potentially, yes. It raises concerns about escalation from conventional conflict. In China, ultimate authority is with the chairman of the Central Military Commission, who is also the president. They also stress the importance of human decision makers, although they are exploring AI for decision support, which brings its own concerns.
What about the UK? They have those letters of last resort, right?
They do. The Prime Minister has sole authority. And yes, the letters of last resort are instructions written by each new PM for the commanders of the UK's ballistic missile submarines, outlining what to do if the UK has suffered a catastrophic nuclear attack and the government is destroyed or unable to communicate. A unique feature.
France.
The president has exclusive authority. They emphasize human control very strongly, integrating AI cautiously. India's system involves a nuclear command authority with a political council, chaired by the Prime Minister, which is the sole body that can authorize a strike based on input from an executive council.
So a bit more structured involvement.
Seems so.
Yeah.
Pakistan also has a national command authority, chaired by the PM, with civilian and military members. Decisions are ideally by consensus, but reports suggest a voting mechanism exists if needed.
And North Korea.
Ultimate authority rests squarely with Kim Jong-un. It's highly unlikely he would delegate that launch authority. Israel, with its ambiguity, is presumed to have the prime minister, likely in consultation with a small security cabinet, holding the final say. So you see variations in military input, consensus mechanisms, etc., but civilian leadership is paramount everywhere.
So while civilian control is the norm, the military obviously plays a critical advisory and execution role. Now, you mentioned AI being explored. With AI advancing so rapidly, there's a lot of talk about its potential role in these nuclear command and control systems, NC3. Could we ever get to a point of, like, autonomous nuclear launch?
Okay, right now there's a very firm consensus among the major nuclear powers, the P5 included, against complete automation of nuclear launch decisions. Humans remain firmly in the decision loop. That's the official line.
But AI is being integrated in other ways.
Yes, actively. It's being explored and integrated into various parts of NC3 systems. For instance, to enhance situational awareness by processing vast amounts of sensor data much faster than humans can, for early warning of potential threats.
Like spotting missile launches sooner.
Potentially, yes. Also, for providing decision support to human commanders analyzing complex scenarios, suggesting possible courses of action, optimizing the use of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets, bolstering cybersecurity defenses within the NC3 networks, streamlining communications.
The argument being AI speed gives humans more time.
That's often the argument that AI can process information so quickly it could actually give human decision makers more precious time to deliberate in a crisis.
But the idea of AI being involved in decisions with such catastrophic potential, it obviously raises huge concerns. What are the main anxieties?
Oh, there are numerous profound concerns. A major one is the potential for AI to make miscalculations or misinterpret ambiguous data, especially in a fast-moving, high-stress crisis. Could it recommend preemptive action based on a flawed assessment?
Like misreading a conventional attack as nuclear.
Potentially. There's also the risk of automation bias, humans just trusting the AI output without critically questioning it. AI systems can also be brittle, meaning they might perform unpredictably when faced with novel situations they weren't trained on, and a nuclear crisis is definitely novel.
We don't exactly have training data for nuclear war.
Precisely. Ethically, there are deep worries about eroding human responsibility. Can an AI truly understand the consequences, the human suffering? Most would say absolutely not.
And both the US and China have committed to meaningful human control.
They have made statements to that effect. But there's still a concern that even if AI is just providing decision support, its sophistication could subtly shift the balance, especially under extreme time pressure. It could shape the information humans see, limit the options presented, and indirectly push towards escalation. And then there's the fear of a destabilizing AI arms race in this domain.
Okay, let's shift to the technical process. From the moment a president or PM gives the authorization to the actual detonation. What's that sequence? How does a weapon actually work?
It's an incredibly complex, highly classified sequence, governed by those stringent safety and control mechanisms, the always-never principle. Always work when authorized, never otherwise. At the very basic level, the energy comes from nuclear fission, or in more advanced weapons, a combination of fission and fusion.
So for a basic fission bomb, what's the simplified chain of events?
Okay, simplified. It starts with the authenticated authorization, often sent as a coded emergency action message. This leads to coded control activation, transmitting specific unlock codes to things called permissive action links, or PLs.
Like electronic safety locks.
Essentially, yes,
Right.
they prevent unauthorized arming. Once unlocked, the arming sequence begins, often triggered by internal sensors detecting the weapon is on its correct trajectory, falling, accelerating, etc.
Then the conventional explosives inside.
Right. Inside the weapon, conventional high explosives detonate. In a gun-type weapon, like Hiroshima's little boy, this explosion fires one piece of subcritical fissile material, like uranium-235, into another piece, forming a supercritical mass.
Slamming them together.
Exactly. In an implosion-type weapon, like Nagasaki's Fat Man, carefully shaped explosives surround a subcritical core of plutonium. When they detonate, they create a powerful inward shock wave, crushing the plutonium core to supercritical density.
Compressing it instantly.
Precisely. At that exact moment of maximum compression or joining, a neutron initiator, basically a tiny neutron generator inside the weapon, releases a burst of neutrons into the fissile core
To kickstart the reaction.
to kickstart the fission chain reaction. These neutrons hit plutonium or uranium atoms, causing them to split, fission, releasing enormous energy, and crucially, more neutrons. These new neutrons then hit other atoms, causing them to split.
A runaway chain reaction.
Exponentially fast. It goes supercritical almost instantly, releasing that tremendous energy in microseconds. That's the explosion.
And you mentioned safety mechanisms earlier. There are multiple layers built in to prevent accidents.
Absolutely. Modern weapons have multiple redundant safety features. Strong links are robust switches requiring a very specific unique signal, UQS, to allow arming or firing. Many U.S. weapons have two separate strong links. Weak links are components designed to fail safely in abnormal conditions, like a fire or a crash, disabling the weapon.
Built to break, basically.
In a safe way, yes. There's also physical isolation against external energy sources. The requirement for that unique signal ensures only the correct command works. Environmental sensing devices, ESDs, check things like altitude, acceleration, spin the weapon only arms if it experiences the specific environment of its intended delivery. And many use insensitive high explosives, IHE, much harder to detonate accidentally than older explosives.
It's a layered approach.
Definitely. It underscores the recognition of the catastrophic consequences of an unintended detonation. But the sheer complexity, the human element, means the risk of error, malfunction, or even unforeseen vulnerabilities like cyber attacks can never be entirely eliminated. Zero risk is impossible.
Okay, finally on this section, what about the declared doctrines? When do countries say they might actually use these weapons? These seem to vary a lot.
They vary hugely. Declared nuclear doctrines reflect a state's strategic culture, its threat perceptions, its conventional military strength, its alliances, and they come with varying degrees of clarity and transparency.
Some have a no first use policy.
Yes, China has had a long-standing declared no first use NFU policy, committing only to use nukes if attacked with nukes first, though the U.S. DoD sometimes suggests there might be unstated exceptions if China's own nuclear forces or command structure were threatened. India also has a declared NFU policy linked to its credible minimum deterrence posture, promising massive retaliation if it's hit first.
But most nuclear powers reserve the option of first use.
Most do, under certain circumstances. The U.S. policy talks about potential use in extreme circumstances to defend the vital interests of the United States or its allies. They say they're working towards a sole purpose of deterring nuclear attack, but that's contingent on the threat environment and allies. And the 2018 Nuclear Posture Review controversially suggested that even major non-nuclear strategic attacks, like on command and control, could potentially warrant a nuclear response.
That seems like a significant expansion.
It was widely seen that way. Russia's doctrine, as we mentioned, allows use in response to WMD attack or conventional aggression threatening the state's existence. And their nuclear rhetoric around the Ukraine war has certainly raised concerns.
What about the UK and France?
The UK maintains deliberate ambiguity. They don't specify the exact circumstances, timing, or scale. Believing ambiguity enhances deterrence. France calls its posture strictly defensive, for use in extreme circumstances of legitimate self-defense involving its vital interests. President Macron recently added a European dimension to those vital interests. France also rejects NFU and reserves the right to a final warning strike, possibly a limited nuclear strike.
Pakistan explicitly rejects no first use too, right?
Explicitly. Their credible minimum deterrence has evolved into full-spectrum deterrence, which includes tactical nuclear weapons designed to counter India's perceived conventional superiority and deter a potential Indian cold start offensive.
And North Korea.
Their 2022 law actually codifies the right to launch preemptive nuclear strikes if their leadership or key strategic assets are deemed under imminent threat.
Very aggressive posture.
Extremely. And finally, Israel's policy of ambiguity, amabut, means they don't officially declare anything, but their deterrence is widely believed to rest on the Samson option, a threat of massive retaliation if the state faces an existential threat.
So, a whole spectrum of doctrines. But is there a gap between what they say and what they might actually do?
That's the big question, the potential credibility gap between declaratory policy and actual operational planning. Plus, the varying and often opaque interpretations of terms like vital interest or existential threat can be a major source of instability and increase the risk of miscalculation in a crisis. What does existential threat actually mean in practice? It's dangerously unclear.
Given all these factors, the arsenals, the doctrines, the tensions, what's the actual likelihood of a nuclear war? That doomsday clock setting suggests the perceived danger is very high right now.
It does. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist setting the clock at 89 seconds to midnight, the closest it's ever been, is a powerful reflection of the perceived increase in global nuclear risk. It's not arbitrary. They see a dangerous confluence of factors.
Like what specifically?
The war in Ukraine is a huge one. The direct risk of escalation involving nuclear-armed states, Russian nuclear rhetoric, the potential for miscalculation or accident, heightened tensions in the Middle East involving states with nuclear capabilities or aspirations, the widespread modernization, and in some cases, expansion of arsenals we discussed.
And the breakdown of arms control?
Absolutely. The erosion or collapse of key treaties, the lack of high-level diplomatic engagement between major powers, even the impact of misinformation and disinformation, which can degrade communication and hinder crisis response. All these things are interconnected.
Are there actual estimates of the probability?
Quantitative estimates vary wildly. Some experts might say the risk in any given year is tiny. Others put the cumulative risk this century much higher, even up to 80% in some analyses, reflecting the huge uncertainty. But what is clear is a discernible trend of increasing concern. Geopolitics are deteriorating, and there's renewed emphasis on the role of nuclear weapons.
And that perception of risk can itself be dangerous.
It can influence policy, increase anxiety, maybe even make conflict seem more inevitable. It's the dangerous synergy, the way these risk drivers feed off each other, that makes the current moment feel exceptionally perilous.
What are some of the most worrying scenarios that could actually lead to nuclear war? It's probably not the classic Cold War bolt from the blue attack anymore.
Probably not. It's far more likely, experts believe, to emerge from the escalation of a conventional conflict, or from miscalculation or accidents.
How might a conventional conflict escalate?
Imagine a high-intensity conventional war between major powers, say, the US and China, or NATO and Russia. If one side starts facing catastrophic defeat or believes its fundamental existence is threatened, the pressure to use nuclear weapons first, perhaps tactical nukes initially, could become immense.
To stave off defeat.
Or to signal resolve, or de-escalate conventionally by escalating nuclearly, a terrifying concept. Then there's miscalculation and misinterpretation, the fog of war, incomplete intelligence, communication breakdowns, leading one side to mistakenly believe an attack is imminent, prompting them to launch preemptively or retaliate based on false information.
Like the Petrov incident, but without the cool head.
Exactly. Flawed early warning systems, simple human error under immense stress. These are real risks. Policies like launch on warning, launching your missiles based only on warning systems indicating an incoming attack, before the warheads actually land, dramatically shorten decision times and increase the risk of accidental war based on a false alarm.
What about pure accidents? Technical failure.
Still a possibility. Technical malfunctions, unauthorized actions by rogue individuals, though highly unlikely with modern safeguards, or even sophisticated cyber attacks disrupting command and control systems could potentially trigger a launch or an escalation.
Regional conflicts seem like major flashpoints, too.
Definitely. India-Pakistan is often cited as the most dangerous. Short missile flight times, potentially mated warheads ready to go, a history of conflict. It's a volatile mix. That accidental launch of an Indian BrahMos missile into Pakistan in 2022 was a stark reminder of how quickly things could go wrong.
And North Korea.
North Korea features in concerning scenarios, too. Analyst Van Jackson outlined one where North Korea launches a surprise attack on the U.S. The U.S. retaliates, but its missiles overfly Russia. Moscow's potentially flawed early warning system misinterprets this as an attack on Russia, leading to a full-scale Russo-American exchange. It highlights cascading effects and technological vulnerabilities.
The entanglement of conventional and nuclear systems is another risk.
A growing one. Those dual-capable missiles we talked about, shared command and control infrastructure. If you attack a system that's used for both conventional and nuclear operations, how does the other side interpret that? They might see it as an attempt to disable their nuclear capability, prompting them to escalate nuclearly.
It sounds like misinterpretation and escalation are the biggest dangers.
Many plausible scenarios focus on those pathways. Misreading intent, technical failures, the escalatory dynamics of conventional war rather than a deliberate, calculated first strike out of the blue. And something often overlooked is the critical need to reduce reliance on early warning systems and develop clear off-ramps to de-escalate after a first, perhaps limited, nuclear use occurs. How do you stop it spiraling? That's not well understood or planned for. Beyond the immediate horror of detonations, the environmental consequences of a nuclear war sound truly apocalyptic. They are. The effects would extend far beyond the blast zones, potentially triggering catastrophic, long-lasting global environmental changes. The primary concern is nuclear winter.
Explain that concept.
Large-scale nuclear detonations, especially over cities and industrial areas, would ignite massive firestorms. These fires would pump enormous amounts of soot, smoke, and dust high into the atmosphere, into the stratosphere, where it doesn't rain out quickly.
And this soot blocks the sun?
Exactly. This massive stratospheric aerosol layer would block a significant amount of sunlight from reaching the Earth's surface. Models predict dramatic and prolonged global temperature drops, potentially 5 to 10 degrees Celsius globally, maybe even up to 30 degrees C in continental interiors.
Like a sudden ice age.
A rapid, devastating cooling. This would be accompanied by huge reductions in rainfall and major disruptions to weather patterns worldwide. And studies suggest even a limited regional nuclear war, say 100 Hiroshima-sized bombs between India and Pakistan, could inject enough soot, around 5 billion kilograms, to cause significant global cooling and agricultural collapse.
Which leads to famine.
Widespread global famine. Reduced sunlight, plunging temperatures, less rain. It means drastically shortened or eliminated growing seasons. Widespread crop failures across the globe. It would decimate agricultural production, leading to starvation on an unimaginable scale. Natural ecosystems, both land and marine food chains, would collapse.
Are there other major environmental effects?
Yes. Ozone layer depletion is another big one. Nuclear fireballs inject large amounts of nitrogen oxides into the stratosphere, which chemically destroy ozone.
Letting in more UV radiation.
Much more harmful UVB radiation would reach the surface. This increases risks of skin cancer, cataracts in humans and animals, and damages plant life, including crops and marine phytoplankton, the base of the ocean food web.
And then there's the fallout.
Radioactive fallout. Fine particles of dust and debris contaminated with fission products and materials made radioactive by the explosion's neutrons. This gets carried by winds globally.
Contaminating everything.
Contaminating soil, water, vegetation. Long-lived radioactive isotopes like cesium-137 and strontium-90 persist for decades, even centuries. They get into the food chain, concentrate in plants and animals, and ultimately in humans.
Causing long-term health problems.
Significant long-term health issues. Increased rates of cancers, leukemia, thyroid, breast cancer seem particularly sensitive. Genetic mutations, birth defects. Large areas of land could become uninhabitable for generations due to the radiological contamination.
The key takeaway seems to be the global scale of this. It's not just the countries involved.
Absolutely. Nuclear winter, global famine, ozone depletion, widespread fallout. These consequences make nuclear war a catastrophe for all of humanity, not just the belligerents. It underscores our interconnectedness and raises profound ethical questions about intergenerational justice poisoning the planet for those who come after us.
In such a horrifying scenario, what are the actual prospects for human survival? Are there places that might be relatively safer?
Survivability really depends on the scale of the war, your proximity to targets, the availability and quality of shelter, and preparedness. Immediately after a detonation, the threats are blast, heat, initial radiation. FEMA in the U.S. has that simple advice. Get inside, stay tuned.
Break that down.
Get inside. Find a sturdy brick or concrete building. Basements or the middle floors are best. Away from windows, outer walls, roofs where fallout might collect. Cars, mobile homes offer very little protection. Stay inside for at least 24 hours, unless authorities say otherwise, or there's immediate danger like fire or building collapse. Fallout is most intense initially. Radiation levels decay rapidly. Stay tuned. Use a battery or hand crank radio for official info. Other comms might be knocked out by EMP, electromagnetic pulse.
What about decontamination if you are outside?
If you think you're exposed, remove outer clothing immediately. seal it away if possible. Wash exposed skin and hair thoroughly with soap and water if you can. If water's scarce, wiping down is better than nothing.
And food and water.
Food and water in sealed containers or stored inside buildings should generally be safe. Wipe containers before opening if they might have dust on them. Avoid anything unsealed from outdoors until declared safe.
But in a large-scale war, hundreds of millions dead directly.
Easily. Direct fatalities could be in the hundreds of millions. But potentially billions more could die later from starvation due to nuclear winter, disease outbreaks from collapsed sanitation and healthcare, societal breakdown.
Is anywhere truly safe?
No location would be totally immune from the global effects. But some places are often cited as potentially safer due to remoteness, neutrality, maybe agricultural resilience.
Like where?
Remote, neutral places like Antarctica, Iceland, New Zealand, perhaps Switzerland, known for its shelters, Greenland. Distance helps, neutrality helps avoid being targeted, but fallout could still reach them and climate shifts would affect them. Agriculturally, some studies suggest Southern Hemisphere countries like Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, Paraguay, Australia, and maybe Oman might be better able to sustain some food production compared to the Northern Hemisphere, which would likely bear the brunt of nuclear winter.
But safer is very relative here.
Extremely relative. Long-term survival, even in those safer places, would be incredibly challenging. Global famine, ecosystem collapse, breakdown of trade, supply chains, healthcare, lingering radiation. Public preparedness for a large-scale exchange with destroyed infrastructure is generally very limited. Survival shifts from getting through the first hours to enduring years, maybe decades, of extreme hardship.
As if the existing threat wasn't enough, these emerging technologies seem to be adding whole new layers of complexity and risk.
That's a really critical point. Technologies like hypersonic missiles, cyber warfare, space weaponization, AI, quantum tech, they're all converging and having significant, often destabilizing, impacts on nuclear strategy and stability.
Let's start with hypersonic missiles. Their speed and maneuverability seem like game changers for warning times.
They are. Hypersonics, generally Mach 5 plus Cayley, highly maneuverable, often flying lower than traditional ballistic missiles, they pose a huge challenge. They drastically slash warning and reaction times down to maybe just minutes.
Putting immense pressure on decision makers.
Immense pressure on leaders, on early warning systems. It increases the risk of misinterpretation, acting on incomplete information. That sheer promptness might also create dangerous incentives for preemptive strikes against time-sensitive targets, intensifying those use-it-or-lose-it pressures in a crisis.
And they're harder to defend against.
Their ability to maneuver potentially makes them better at penetrating missile defenses. This enhances their deterrent value, but also makes them attractive targets for preventive action by an adversary. And again, that dual capability issue, conventional or nuclear warhead, creates huge ambiguity on launch detection, forcing worst-case assumptions and potentially lowering the nuclear threshold.
Cyber warfare seems like a completely different kind of threat, targeting the command systems themselves.
Absolutely. Nuclear command, control, and communications, NC3 systems, rely increasingly on digital networks. Even systems supposedly air-gapped aren't immune. The threats are diverse, disrupting early warning systems, blinding satellites or radars, feeding false information, triggering false alarms, interrupting critical communication links, severing or manipulating launch orders, compromising command and control networks themselves, gaining clandestine access, maybe disabling systems, altering targeting, or in the most extreme, highly difficult scenario, causing an unauthorized launch, degrading the delivery systems, messing with the software or hardware of missiles, subs, bombers.
And this undermines deterrence.
Directly. If you can't be sure your second strike capability will work because it might be cyber compromised, your confidence in deterrence erodes. This again increases pressure towards first use it before you lose it to a cyber attack.
And cyber attacks are stealthy.
Very. This creates huge uncertainty, silent sabotage. Is my deterrent reliable? Is theirs? Plus, attribution is hard. Who launched the cyber attack? Misdirecting retaliation could lead to catastrophic escalation. The mere possibility forces nuclear strategy to account for cyber vulnerabilities, potentially leading to more aggressive postures, or even a defensive cyber arms race targeting nuclear systems. Verifiable arms control for this cyber-nuclear nexus is incredibly hard, but crucial.
Space assets have become vital for NC3 too. What are the threats there?
Space is fundamental now. Early warning satellites like SBIR's Next-Gen OPR, secure communication satellites AEHF for launch orders, ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, even PNT like GPS for timing nuclear detonations. These are all critical NC3 functions relying on space.
But space is getting more contested.
Increasingly congested and contested. These assets are becoming vulnerable. Threats include anti-satellite weapons, AS, kinetic kill vehicles that physically smash satellites, directed energy weapons, co-orbital ASATs that maneuver close. Also, cyber attacks on ground stations or the satellites themselves, electronic warfare jamming or spoofing signals.
And attacking these space assets is destabilizing.
Profoundly. An attack on key NC-3 satellites could easily be interpreted as a prelude to a disarming first strike against terrestrial forces, potentially triggering preemptive retaliation. The U.S. 2018 NPR explicitly warned about this. And again, the dual-use problem. Many satellites serve both conventional and nuclear functions. Attacking one in a conventional conflict could inadvertently cross nuclear thresholds. So there's a big focus now on making space systems more resilient, hardening, redundancy, disaggregation into larger constellations, defensive capabilities.
AI is being looked at for more than just command and control, right? Other nuclear security applications.
Yes. Beyond NC-3, AI is being explored for things like proliferation monitoring and arms control verification. AI algorithms could potentially analyze vast data sets, satellite imagery, sensor data, open source intelligence much faster and maybe more effectively than humans, looking for anomalies indicating clandestine weapons programs or assessing declared nuclear activities.
But there are risks and ethical issues there too.
Big time. Accountability is a huge issue. If an AI makes a mistake, a false positive on proliferation, for instance, who is responsible, bias in the AI's training data could lead to inaccurate assessments targeting certain countries unfairly. Over-reliance without critical human oversight could lead to disastrous policy decisions. And again, the potential for an AI arms race competing to develop the best AI for nuclear intelligence could just fuel mistrust and divert focus from diplomacy. The IAEA recognizes this, calling for ethical frameworks, like their ENAI initiative.
Quantum technologies sound like something out of science fiction, but they have real implications too.
They do. Quantum computing, communications, sensing, they all promise transformative capabilities with significant nuclear security implications.
Quantum computing breaking encryption.
That's the near-term threat. Fault-tolerant quantum computers, when built, are expected to break current public key encryption, like RSO, ECC, used to protect classified data, including NC-3 communications, maybe even PL codes eventually. Shor's algorithm can do it. This creates huge urgency to transition to post-quantum cryptography, PQC. There's the store now, decrypt later threat adversaries grabbing encrypted data today, hoping to break it with a quantum computer tomorrow.
But quantum could also help secure communications.
Potentially, yes. Quantum communications, especially quantum key distribution, QKD, offers the theoretical possibility of ultra-secure communication channels. Any attempt to eavesdrop inherently disturbs the quantum state and is detectable. Could be very useful for secured NC-3 links.
And quantum sensing.
This could be revolutionary. Quantum sensors promise unprecedented sensitivity. Potential applications include detecting stealth submarines or hidden underground structures through tiny gravitational or magnetic anomalies, identifying minute traces of nuclear materials great for verification, or finding clandestine programs, providing highly accurate positioning, navigation, and timing, PNT, independent of vulnerable GPS.
So quantum sensing could be good for verification, but bad for stability if it makes second strike systems vulnerable.
Exactly. That's the duality. It could make verification much stronger, increasing transparency, but it could also undermine stability by making previously invulnerable deterrents, like submarines, detectable. Managing that tension will be a key challenge.
It sounds like the real danger isn't any one of these technologies, but how they all interact.
Precisely. The most profound challenge comes from the cumulative and interactive effects. You have AI, autonomous systems, hypersonics, counterspace, cyber, deepfakes for disinformation, quantum, all converging. It creates an incredibly complex, fast-paced, unpredictable risk environment for nuclear decision-making and NC-3 security.
And they erode traditional deterrent.
They can, by enabling persistent surveillance that reduces second-strike confidence, by compressing decision timelines potentially beyond human limits, pushing towards automation, by creating new attack vectors like cyber and space, by introducing profound uncertainties, those unknown unknowns.
Adopting tech too fast could be risky.
Very risky if you don't fully understand the limitations or how it interacts with other systems. It can lead to false confidence or dangerous misperceptions. Traditional deterrence models, developed for a simpler bipolar world, look increasingly inadequate. There's talk of needing new tools like complex digital twin simulations just to try and grasp and mitigate these interactive risks. The very nature of warfare is changing, demanding a fundamental rethink of nuclear risk management.
So faced with all these escalating dangers, what are the paths towards actually mitigating the nuclear threat? What diplomatic efforts, disarmament initiatives are happening now?
Well, multilateral diplomacy remains central, even though the traditional forums are facing major headwinds. One significant recent development is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW.
The ban treaty.
Right. It entered into force in January 2021. Its comprehensive bans development, testing, production, possession, use, threat of use, everything. As of April 2025, it has 73 states parties.
Driven by non-nuclear states and civil society.
Largely, yes. Spearheaded by non-nuclear states and organizations like ICAN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, who won the Nobel Peace Prize for it in 2017. The TPNW's approach is to stigmatize nuclear weapons, focus on their humanitarian consequences, and challenge the legitimacy of deterrence theory itself.
But the nuclear-armed states oppose it.
Strongly. All 9 nuclear states and all NATO members argue it doesn't reflect the current security reality, ignores deterrence, and could even undermine the NPT, so it's created a deep divide. But it has become an important platform for non-nuclear states to push for faster disarmament. They were key in getting the UN to commission that new study on nuclear war effects.
Meanwhile, traditional arms control is struggling.
Severely strained. The NPT faces deadlock over disarmament progress. Key U.S.-Russia treaties are dead, INF, or dying. New START, suspended by Russia, expires 2026, no successor in sight. The main negotiating body, the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva, has been deadlocked for over 2 decades.
Are there any other initiatives?
There are smaller things. The UN has an International Day for Disarmament Awareness on March 5th. Regional nuclear weapon-free zones exist in several parts of the world and help strengthen non-proliferation norms locally. But the big picture for traditional arms control is pretty bleak right now.
The ethical questions surrounding nuclear weapons just seem insurmountable.
They are profound and enduring. We're talking about weapons capable of indiscriminate mass destruction, potentially human extinction, causing horrific, long-lasting environmental damage. These are widely seen as profound moral evils.
Even just possessing them is ethically questionable.
Increasingly so. Some argue it's inherently immoral just to possess the means for such disproportionate destruction. Pope Francis has been very clear, saying their very possession should be condemned.
And deterrence itself is morally tricky.
Highly precarious.
Yeah.
You're preventing one immoral act, war, by threatening an arguably equal or greater immoral act, nuclear retaliation. Proponents say deterrence worked, preventing major wars. Critics say holding populations hostage is morally reprehensible, the risk of catastrophic failure is unacceptable, and maintaining readiness violates human rights and democratic principles. Is the threatened loss ever proportionate?
And actually using them.
Almost universally considered immoral. Mass civilian deaths are inevitable, violating core principles of warfare like discrimination and proportionality. Plus the devastating long-term environmental effects we discussed. Oppenheimer's "Now I Am Become Death, the Destroyer of Worlds," quote, captures that horror.
There's also the issue of intergenerational justice.
Yes, creating weapons in waste that remain dangerous for centuries, millennia even. It imposes huge burdens and risks on future generations who had absolutely no say in their creation or use. Religious perspectives also weigh in heavily. Catholic bishops calling for disarmament, Islamic scholars generally deeming first use unjustifiable. The ethical ground is constantly shifting, making continued reliance harder to justify morally.
And the economic burden of maintaining and modernizing these arsenals must be massive.
It is immense. The costs divert staggering resources from other vital needs. In 2023 alone, the 9 nuclear states spent an estimated $91.4 billion on their nuclear forces.
$91 billion.
That's about $2,898 every single second. Cumulatively, just from 2019 to 2023, it was around $387 billion. U.S. spending is projected to be over $110 billion in FY25, over $324 for every taxpayer. Proposed defense spending for FY26 tops $1 trillion, a big chunk for nuclear forces.
That's a huge opportunity cost.
Massive. Resources that could go to climate change, pandemics, poverty reduction, education, and often the communities most affected by the production and testing legacy are already struggling economically. This current modernization wave is just driving costs higher, locking in spending for decades, making any future peace dividend from disarmament seem further away.
What role does public awareness, civil society play in all this? Can they make a difference?
They are absolutely crucial. Building the political will for disarmament and risk reduction requires public understanding and pressure. Organizations like ICAN, C&D in the UK, and many others play a vital role. Through education, advocacy, challenging the narratives pushed by governments, mobilizing citizens, ICANN's success with the TPNW really showed the power civil society can have in shifting international norms, even against the opposition of powerful states.
The UN has that awareness day, too.
March 5th, yeah. Trying to deepen public understanding, especially among young people. Grassroots campaigns highlight the humanitarian costs, the economic waste, trying to build movements from the ground up.
But keeping people engaged seems hard. It's complex, maybe feels distant.
That's the persistent challenge. The technical complexity, the perceived remoteness of the threat during peacetime, competition from other urgent issues, it can all lead to apathy or disengagement. Overcoming that requires continuous, accessible education, more transparency from governments, and clearly articulating the tangible benefits, security, economic, moral of a world free from nuclear weapons.
There are also these other crucial aspects we should touch on, like the long-term impact of nuclear fallout on ecosystems.
Right. Fallout, those radioactive particles, doesn't just disappear. It gets into the environment and stays there. The immediate aftermath is most radioactive, yes, but long-lived isotopes cause persistent problems.
How does it contaminate things?
Cesium-137, strontium-90, others. They get into soil, water, get absorbed by plants. Then they move up the food chain, bioaccumulating in animals and humans. Strontium mimics calcium, goes into bones, increases cancer risk. Cesium affects muscles, heart.
And it disrupts whole ecosystems.
Definitely. It harms wildlife directly, reduces biodiversity, water sources become unsafe. It can even affect processes like pollination if insect populations crash. Large areas can become essentially dead zones, leading to long-term ecological imbalances. Plus, the dust and aerosols thrown up can have lingering atmospheric and climatic effects beyond nuclear winter. And we still see the legacy today.
From the testing era.
Yeah. Former test sites, often in remote areas home to indigenous populations, remain contaminated, posing ongoing health risks decades later.
And the ethical dimension goes beyond just use to labor issues, even human experiments.
That's a critical, often overlooked point. The history of developing these weapons is ethically fraught. Think about the early uranium miners, often poorly paid, given little information about the risks, inadequate protection. Many, like the Navajo miners in the U.S., suffered high rates of cancer and respiratory disease.
A hidden cost.
A terrible hidden cost. There was even a subculture of itinerant nuclear workers moving between sites, potentially accumulating exposures. Studies confirm higher cancer mortality among nuclear workers. And then there were the actual human radiation experiments conducted by governments during the Cold War.
Experiments on citizens.
Yes, often without informed consent, testing the effects of radiation. Profound ethical violations, abuses of power. Compensation programs later tried to provide some redress, but the ethical stain remains. It shows the moral questions extend through the entire life cycle of these weapons.
As we wrap up this deep dive, it's just starkly clear, isn't it? Nuclear weapons are still this central, incredibly perilous part of our world. We've traced the journey, scientific discovery, Cold War deterrence, now this dangerous landscape with 9 nuclear powers all modernizing, while arms control crumbles. That doomsday clock isn't set so close for nothing.
And the emerging technologies we discussed, hypersonics, cyber, AI, they're just adding layers of complexity, new vulnerabilities, compressing decision times, increasing the chances for miscalculation. The consequences of any use remain utterly catastrophic: nuclear winter, global famine, long-term fallout. It's an existential threat.
Efforts to regulate diplomatic initiatives like the TPNW exist, but face huge challenges from the nuclear states. Traditional arms control is struggling, and those profound ethical dilemmas about possession, deterrence, use, they haven't gone away. The economic burden is immense.
Mitigating this threat really demands a huge, multifaceted effort. We need revitalized diplomacy somehow. We need careful ethical management of these new technologies. We need to strengthen non-proliferation efforts. We need continued ethical reflection. And critically, we need sustained public awareness and engagement to build political will.
So maybe the final thought is this. If creating these weapons gave us a knowledge we can never truly lose, never unlearn,
Then what profound wisdom must we collectively cultivate, must we gain, to ensure that knowledge is never again put into practice? The power to cause such utter destruction resides entirely in human hands, human decisions. What does that reality tell us about our own capacity for both breathtaking creation and terrifying annihilation? And maybe more importantly, what future are we actively choosing right now to build with that knowledge?
a truly powerful and vital question to carry forward. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us into the complex and absolutely critical issue of nuclear weapons.
It's essential to grapple with.
We really hope this has provided you, our listener, with a clearer, perhaps more nuanced understanding of the current landscape, the history, and the risks we face. We encourage you to reflect on this information, maybe explore some of the sources or related topics further. Join us next time for another deep dive into